بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وآله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I pray that everyone is doing well, inshallah, and I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to take advantage of the days that we have left from this beautiful month of Ramadan. Alhamdulillah, we have already completed 10 days. We've completed 11 days, and alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed us to witness these first 10 to 11 days, and I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to witness the rest of Ramadan and to take the most benefit that we can from these days that we have left ahead of us. Inshallah, today we will be looking at some verses from the 11th juz of the Quran. In the 11th juz, the ending part of Surah Tawbah comes in this 11th juz. So there's around 6 pages of Surah Tawbah in the 11th juz, and then the rest of the 11th juz is Surah Yunus. Surah Tawbah deals with different aspects of Muslim society. So as we know, the Quran does not just teach us how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our physical acts of worship, for example, our prayer, or zakat, or hajj, or fasting, the 5 pillars of Islam. Islam does not just teach us these things, although these are very important. But Islam, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us how to live our lives as a complete Muslim in all aspects of our life. So for example, in Surah Nisa, you will find aspects of marital law, divorce law. You will find laws regarding inheritance. You will find in Surah Tawbah laws regarding military and war. You will find all sorts of laws in the Quran because the Quran teaches us how to live as a proper society. Right? So there are some Muslims who feel that I'm just going to look at the Quran. The Quran only teaches me how to worship Allah through fasting or praying or zakat, but that is not correct. Rather, Islam is a complete way of life, and so we look at the Quran in order to learn how to be a complete Muslim. So therefore, Surah At-Tawbah is a surah that deals with 2 battles that took place during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and these are the Battle of Hunayn and the Battle of Tabuk. The Battle of Hunayn took place in the valley of Hunayn, which is near Ta'if, between the Muslims and the Hawazin and Thaqif tribes. And the Battle of Tabuk took place in the 9th year of Hijri. However, it was not really a battle. Okay, so the Muslims, they prepared, and I will, inshallah, this is what I would like to speak about today, the Battle of Tabuk and some incidences regarding this. So what happened was that the Muslims, this was the first time in the life of the Prophet ﷺ that the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims were going to meet the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. And they were a world power at that time, right? So it was a very big event that was going to take place. So the Prophet ﷺ mandated that every single able-bodied Muslim in Medina had to join the army. Every single able-bodied Muslim had to join the army. If you were healthy and you could fight, then you had to go for the Battle of Tabuk. Now, long story short, what happened was that the Roman Empire, they basically didn't show up. They got scared, they didn't show up. So the Muslims traveled, there was no battle, they camped out for a few days, for a few weeks, and then they ended up coming back to Medina. And so in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about several things that we need to understand as Muslims in terms of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because what happened was that the Prophet ﷺ mandated that everyone who was able to fight had to go. But many of the munafiqeen stayed behind. Right? They gave excuses and they did not go out for the battle of Tabuk. And so in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is chastising or rebuking the munafiqeen and those people who stayed behind. There were also some sincere Muslims who stayed behind as well. And they did not stay behind in order to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they stayed behind for some other purposes. And they were also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about them in this surah as well. That when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells us to do something, we must do that. Surah Tawbah is a very interesting surah because of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing his anger in this surah, right? And so that's why at the beginning of this surah, for those of you who have read Surah Tawbah, when you're reading the Quran from Surah Al-Anfal and then you continue to Surah Tawbah, you find that there is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is not written at the beginning of Surah Tawbah. So there are different opinions as to why that is the case. Why is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim not written at the beginning of Surah At-Tawbah? There are two main opinions. One is that because this is a surah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing his anger to the munafiqeen and to those tribes who broke the treaty with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at Hudaybiyah and the other mushrikeen as well. So that is why, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing his anger towards them, it is not befitting that Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is written at the beginning of the surah, which means in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. So mercy does not, it is not proper that the surah starts in such a way in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is being shown. However, the rest of the surah deals with the munafiqeen and the mushrikeen. That is one opinion. But another opinion, which seems to be more correct, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, most of the mufassirun, they mention this opinion that I'm about to mention, and that is what is explained by the Sahaba themselves. Right? So the Sahaba themselves, they explain that the reason why Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim was not included at the beginning of Surah At-Tawbah is because Surah Al-Anfal, the subject matter of Surah Al-Anfal, which comes right before Surah Tawbah, is very similar to the subject matter of Surah At-Tawbah. They are very similar. And Surah At-Tawbah was revealed very late in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was revealed, as I mentioned, in the 9th year. In the 9th year of the Hijrah. So a little bit over a year before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away. Surah Al-Anfal deals with war and laws of war and military. For example, Anfal, right? It's regarding the spoils of war. And Surah At-Tawbah is also regarding laws regarding war and military. So therefore, because the subject matter of both of these surahs are very similar, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were not sure whether this is one long surah or whether these are two separate surahs. So therefore, and they did not ask the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was not clear. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not make it clear if these are two separate surahs or if they're just one long surah. So for that purpose, they are demarcated in the Quran as two separate surahs, but there is no Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim in between them, so that when a person is reading from Surah Al-Anfal, they will just continue into Surah At-Tawbah, because perhaps it is one long surah, perhaps they are two different surahs, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So that is one of the interesting things about Surah At-Tawbah. That Surah At-Tawbah is the only surah in the entire Quran in which Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is not mentioned at the beginning of this surah. Now, in this surah, you will have many different interesting things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching the Muslims and the Sahaba and us by extension. One of those things is the incident that took place in which the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims went out for the Battle of Tabuk, as I mentioned, and some of the munafiqeen stayed back, as well as some sincere Muslims. Some sincere Muslims also ended up staying back, and inshallah we will speak about, I would like to share this incident today. When the Prophet ﷺ commanded all of the companions to go out for battle, there were 3 companions who stayed back. Okay, there were Ka'b ibn Malik, Murara ibn Rabi' and Hilal ibn Umayyah radiyallahu anhum. They stayed back. Okay, they stayed back. And this is a very lengthy hadith that is narrated. And I will not go over the entire hadith because it is very long, but I will, inshallah, summarize this hadith. Ka'b ibn Malik radiyallahu anhu narrates the reason why he stayed back. So Ka'b ibn Malik, he is the narrator of this hadith himself. So he's telling this hadith what happened. He says that the Battle of Tabuk was a very interesting battle because the Prophet ﷺ, as I said, commanded everyone to go. Now, this was the only battle that Ka'b ibn Malik did not participate in. He participated in every other battle except for Tabuk, as well as the Battle of Badr. And the reason why he didn't participate in the Battle of Badr is because the Prophet ﷺ did not mandate everyone to participate in the Battle of Badr. Whoever wanted to go for Badr, they could go for Badr. Whoever did not want to go for Badr, they didn't have to go. So because it was not something that everyone had to do, he stayed back for Badr. But for every battle after Badr, up to Tabuk, he participated in the battle. Not only that, but he was also present at Bay'atul Aqaba, which is a very important incident that took place in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. So Ka'b ibn Malik is making it clear in this hadith that I was always present with the Prophet ﷺ. I was not scared to fight, for example. I was not trying to stay behind. But at the time of the Battle of Tabuk, for whatever reason, I thought that, you know what, I will let the Muslims go. I'll let the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba travel, and I will catch up with them, right? I did not prepare in advance like I was supposed to. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he announced that we are going to go for battle, what the other Sahaba did is that they quickly prepared. They prepared that, okay, we'll take care of everything at home so that we can go. Ka'b ibn Malik decided that I will stay behind and I will catch up with them a little bit later. And the Muslims left. The Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, they went for the Battle of Tabuk. Now, Ka'b ibn Malik, he thought that, you know what, I'll catch up with them later today. And then, the day passed, I'll catch up with them tomorrow. Then a couple days passed, okay, you know what, I'll catch up with them. I still have time. I'm only one person. They're traveling with the whole army. It's easy for me to catch up with them. Eventually, what happened is that he realized that, you know what, they are way too far now, and I cannot catch up with them. So he decided that, you know what, it is too late for me to catch up with them. So he stayed back in Medina. What ended up happening is that the Prophet ﷺ came back to Medina with the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. As I mentioned, there was no battle that took place because the Romans, they did not show up. So the Prophet ﷺ came back. And it was the habit of the Prophet ﷺ that when he came back to Medina from a battle or from travel, he would pray 2 rakats in the masjid and he would sit there for the people of Medina to come and visit him, to say salam, and also for the munafiqeen, they would come and they would present their excuses as to why they were not able to come. So Ka'b ibn Malik, subhanAllah, you can imagine the scenario, right? It was a very scary time for him because the munafiqeen are all lined up to give their excuses one by one, that this is why I did not go, this is why. And the Prophet ﷺ knew, of course. He knew that they were lying, but he was still listening to them. Ka'b ibn Malik was waiting in line and he says that I was thinking, what should I make up? What excuse should I give? I really did not have any excuse. But he was thinking that, what should I say? So eventually, when it was his turn, he decided that, you know what, I can't lie. There's nothing that I can say. This is the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If I lie to him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to make it clear that I lied. So therefore, I will just tell him the truth. And so he told the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam the truth, that I do not have any excuse. I'm paraphrasing this very long hadith, but inshallah, the reason why is for purpose of time, but I want to show some of the lessons that we can derive from this hadith. So he told the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that I don't have any excuse, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not happy with this. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not happy. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam ordered the Sahaba radiallahu anhum to actually refrain from talking to Ka'b ibn Malik. This was a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a rebuke from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to tell the Sahaba not to interact with him, not to speak with him. And this went on for many days, where the Prophet ﷺ was not speaking to him. And after some days, the Prophet ﷺ also ordered that nobody else can speak to him. And on the 50th day, right, imagine 50 days went by where nobody was speaking to Ka'b ibn Malik, and it was very difficult for him. He was very depressed. He was literally depressed. He was very sad. He didn't know what to do. He actually left. He went on the outskirts of Medina, and he was just staying by himself. Now look at this, right? And this is the beautiful thing that I want to mention, how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were. The Prophet ﷺ eventually told the Sahaba radiallahu anhum that Ka'b ibn Malik had been forgiven. So I'll just read the hadith inshallah in English, and then inshallah I will show some of the beautiful lessons. So Ka'b ibn Malik radiallahu anhu says that when 40 out of the 50 nights had passed, okay, here. So Ka'b ibn Malik radiallahu anhu says that when the 50th night passed, right? So 50 nights this had been going on, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not speaking to him, and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were not speaking to him either. When the 50th night passed, I made Fajr Salah and went to the roof. While I sat there, my condition was a mirror of what Allah Ta'ala had said in the Quran, that the earth was straightened for me despite all of its vastness, and my own soul was straightened for me. Meaning that the earth is so vast, yet my heart was so narrow. Right? The earth is so big, but my heart was so narrow because of the difficulty that I was feeling. This is spoken about in Surah, in ayah number 118 of Surah At-Tawbah. All of a sudden came the voice of a caller calling me from the heights of the hill of Salah, loudly announcing, "O Ka'b ibn Malik, be happy with the good news." So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, what happened is that he went onto the mountain, the hill of Salah, and he announced that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had accepted the tawbah of Ka'b ibn Malik and offered congratulations for his success. Ka'b ibn Malik said, hearing this voice, I fell down prostrating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I fell down in sajda. Imagine, he was so happy. He was not complaining. He was not saying that, you know what, why is the Prophet ﷺ boycotting me? I made a mistake, but I said sorry. Why is he, giving me such a harsh punishment? No, rather he realized that this is the result of my own actions, and I must deal with that. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted his tawbah after 50 days of him asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgiveness, he immediately fell down into sajda. So happy was I that I broke into tears. He started crying. I had learned that my good days have come back. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had told the Sahaba after the Salah of Fajr that our tawbah was accepted, meaning this tawbah of Ka'b ibn Malik and the two other companions as well, Murara ibn Rabi' and Hilal ibn Umayyah. Everyone ran out to congratulate the three of us. Some of them rode on horses to reach me, but the voice of the person calling from the hill was quicker than the horse. Subhanallah, look at how beautiful the reaction of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were. That they did not chastise him and they did not make fun of him. Rather, they were happy for him, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had accepted his tawbah. They were happy with him when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had accepted his tawbah. When Talha ibn Ubaidullah saw me, he was the first to rise and rush towards me. Shaking my hands, he congratulated me for the acceptance of my tawbah. I cannot forget the good Talha did to me on that day. When I said my salam to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his blessed face was radiant with delight. He said, "O Ka'b, I congratulate you for this day of bliss for you, the best day of your life since you were born." I said, "Ya Rasulullah, is this order from you or is it from Allah?" Meaning, are you accepting my tawbah or is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepting my tawbah? And what did the Prophet ﷺ say? He said, "No, this order is from Allah Ta'ala. You had told the truth. Allah Ta'ala made your truthfulness come out in the open." Subhanallah, this shows us that we should always tell the truth, right? He was thinking that what can I say? What excuse can I give? Should I lie to the Prophet ﷺ? Eventually, he recognized that no, I cannot lie to the Prophet ﷺ. I would just tell the truth, and I would say exactly that. I didn't have any excuse, and I'm sorry. There's no excuse I can give. I should have gone out for the battle, but I didn't. And this shows us that although we tell the truth, there may be some negative consequence to that. But at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not forgive a person. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold the person accountable if they are to lie. Ka'b ibn Malik did not lie, and there were still negative consequences where he was boycotted for 50 days. 40 out of the 50 days he was boycotted. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted his tawbah. And all of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were so happy with him. They were very, very happy with him. And this is the lesson that I want to leave everyone off with, inshallah. That when we hear of someone coming close to the deen, when we hear of someone accepting Islam, or when we hear of someone seeking forgiveness for whatever they've done previously in their life, we should open our arms to that person and allow them and be a means for that person to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should be a catalyst for good, and we should not be a means for people turning away from the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? This happens too often. When a person is trying to change their life around, people make fun of them, or people say bad comments to them, or they say that, you know what, do you not recognize how you used to be? You know, it can be your own spouse, for example. It could be your sibling, for example. It could be your parents. It could be your children. When they're trying to change and they're trying to do good, we remind them of their sins. We remind them of their past. We remind them of everything that they used to do. That, don't you remember when you used to do this? Don't you remember this? You think you're such a good person? You're such a bad person. Subhanallah, that's not how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were. That is not how they were at all. Rather, when any of them turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is a prime example of that, where Ka'b ibn Malik radiallahu anhu did tawbah to Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted his tawbah, and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were extremely happy for him. And they all met him they gave him hugs, they were shaking his hands, and they were so happy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted his tawbah. So this is how we should be as well. We should be encouraging others to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the believers as people who command towards good and they forbid towards evil. And when a person decides to change and come closer to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should do whatever we can to help that person come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In conclusion, I want to mention that Surah Tawbah is a beautiful example of how the Quran must be read in context. The Quran must be read in context. We cannot take a verse out of the Quran and say that, you know what, this is how I want to apply it. This is what I think, it means, and this is how I'm going to apply it, without looking at the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is wrong. Because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun," that indeed we have revealed the Quran, we have revealed the remembrance, meaning the Quran, and indeed we will protect it. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects the Quran not only in terms of its words, but also in terms of its meanings. So whenever we want to learn the meanings of any of the verses of the Quran, we must look at how the Prophet ﷺ interpreted it, how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum interpreted it, because there is context to the Quran. The Quran was not all revealed at once, rather it was revealed piece by piece as a situation occurred in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a verse explaining what to do in that situation. So there is context to the verses of the Quran. And I want to mention that because Surah Tawbah is a beautiful example of that. There are many people who try to show that Islam is a violent religion or an oppressive religion, and they'll take some verses out of Surah Tawbah to show that. But they don't recognize that these verses are within the context of a particular incident. And as I mentioned, Surah Tawbah deals with the battle of Tabuk and the battle of Hunayn and the munafiqeen and the mushrikeen and the treaty of Hudaybiyah who broke their treaty with the Prophet ﷺ. So there is context to these verses. Islam is a beautiful religion that we must realize and we must understand. And whenever there is a verse that we come across that may not make sense to us, or it may be confusing to us, we must ask those scholars, the people of knowledge, for the explanation, we must look in the books of tafsir and understand what is the proper meaning of this verse, because we should never let anything linger on our minds if something is confusing. We should always understand that the Quran is absolutely beautiful, it is free from any faults, and it is a perfect message and a way of life for all of us. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to live our lives according to the Quran. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows our connection with the Quran to grow. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us from among those people who are like walking Qur'ans, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was described as being like a walking Qur'an. With that, inshallah, we will conclude. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.